Nashville Public Radio serves Middle Tennessee in many ways, every day, including through this podcast. You can support it by leaving a review or rating, by telling a friend about it, or by contributing at wpln.org/give.
This is the Nashvillager Podcast. It's February 20th, 2026. Happy Friday. There's some things you don't realize until you start working at a radio station, and one of them is that our broadcast system is part of our national defense. We've got machinery in our building at Nashville Public Radio that is linked to the emergency alert system. We are weekly tests, and that same system is controlled by the National Weather Service when there are tornadoes or flash flooding. But that system can also be controlled by the president to alert us of imminent danger. And on this date, in 1971, it was maybe the biggest oops of all time that led to real panic, given that nuclear war was not out of the question in those years. I'm Blake Farmer, in for Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee with some historical context from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. This was not a drill. At least that's what the alert said on that day in 1971. What was known then as the emergency broadcast system was tested each Saturday. At the time, broadcasters were given a daily code word. If the code word on the message matched the code word they'd received, well, the emergency was real. It took about 40 minutes for the government to figure out what happened and send a cancellation notice. But in that time, listeners were frantic. Could it be something happened related to the Vietnam War? The battle against communism was also upping the prospect of nuclear war at the time. Apparently, an operator inside the Cheyenne Mountain complex put in the wrong tape to broadcast. Later changes were made to protect against similar snafus. Since then, the system has been continually modernized. As we all know, we get warnings on our cell phones now, along with what comes over the air on TV and on radio. Perhaps you were startled every time you'd get one during the recent ice storm, letting you know where the warming shelters were. But nationwide alerts are also possible. In fact, in 2018, the first presidential alert was sent out that also went to cell phones. Emergency alerts are serious business in radio, and the Federal Communications Commission does not mess around with false alarms, even when they happen on public radio. Back in December, American Public Media settled with the FCC for $86,000, and it wasn't even an initiation of the EAS. The tone of the emergency alert system was played in a story about chasing tornadoes. It aired on more than 500 public radio stations, and the FCC got emails notifying them of the false alarm. They said authorized use of the EAS tones thus presents a substantial threat to public safety. That's what the FCC wrote in the consent decree. Alert fatigue is real. So you can trust the alerts that you're getting on the radio. Now, I can't vouch for alerts you get anywhere else. In just a few minutes, a story about potentially funneling foster kids into jail-like facilities. That's coming up after the newscast.
Best journalism in the nation. That's an apt description for a lot of what you hear on WPLN News. The proof this spring is in the array of journalism awards coming in. The Supermajority podcast won 3 national contests. Our investigative reporting, partnered with ProPublica, was named some of the best education coverage in the country. And for arts and culture, This Is Nashville and our music journalism are being honored on the national stage. We're proud, and you can be too.
With WPLN News, I'm Blake Farmer with these top stories. The Tennessee legislature's top leaders say they want changes at Nashville Electric Service before the end of the legislative session this spring. Senate Speaker Randy McNally said he believes CEO Teresa Broyles Applin should be removed, telling News Channel 5 the Three Stooges could have done a better job preparing for the ice storm. The historic ice storm resulted in the largest power outage in NES history and left some areas without electricity for 2 weeks. Republican leaders say they plan to intervene, but are waiting to see what Nashville does first. This week, Mayor Freddie O'Connell appointed an investigative committee with bipartisan leadership, former Governor Phil Bredesen and former House Speaker Beth Harwell. Republican leaders have floated the idea of converting the public utility into a member-owned cooperative. Private banks, hospitals, and insurance companies in Tennessee could soon refuse to recognize gay marriages. The state house has passed a bill exempting private citizens from federal anti-discrimination law. WPLN's Mariana Bacquiao reports.
On the House floor, Democrats argued this bill defies the Supreme Court case that legalized gay marriage across the country. Republican Representative Gino Bolso of Franklin said it is constitutional, as it only means private citizens do not have to recognize same-sex marriages.
And it was the U.S. Supreme Court on June the 26th of 2015 that overstepped its bounds and invented this right to marriage of individuals of the same sex, despite there being no support whatsoever in the language of the 14th Amendment for that proposition.
Republican Representative Monty Fritz agreed.
The court decided to redefine something that Almighty God had not given that court the authority to redefine.
But LGBTQ advocates worry the law will go beyond personal belief and materially harm gay couples. In rural areas, community banks and smaller hospitals could refuse to recognize same-sex marriages. Here's Chris Sanders of the Tennessee Equality Project.
Imagine if the Treasury Secretary were driving through the state of Tennessee and had an accident in a small rural county, and someone refused to recognize his husband as his husband, and they had to make medical decisions or wanted to visit in the healthcare facility.
The measure still needs to clear multiple hurdles in the Senate before it can become law. Mariana Bacquiao, WPLN News.
More than 50 hours of footage obtained from ICE raids in Nashville last May offer a detailed look at the operation and attitudes of the officers making arrests. A new investigation reveals that Tennessee Highway Patrol officers made hundreds of stops for minor traffic violations like broken headlights or window tint in corridors of Nashville known for having high immigrant populations. Footage shows officers often asking non-white people where they were born and making comments when somebody spoke little English or with an accent. Hand signals were then used for ICE agents to step in and detain people, including passengers who were not required to answer questions or provide documents during a traffic stop. While the THP claimed its stops were focused on public safety, data showed that the agency actually issued far fewer citations compared to the same period the previous year. Instead, they were giving warnings, which increased dramatically. And one white driver, for example, was let off without a citation after driving 64 in a 40 zone. The videos also routinely show troopers and ICE officials using slurs and denigrating language to refer to detainees and joking at their expense. Lighthouse Reports coordinated the investigation, which involved Nashville Noticias, the Nashville Banner, News Channel 5, Mother Jones, and the Institute for Public Service Reporting. The footage was originally obtained through a public records lawsuit by the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, which remains ongoing. ICE did not answer a list of questions provided by the Banner. THP issued a statement saying it, quote, does not engage in enforcement actions based on race, ethnicity, language, or national origin. Franklin-based Nissan North America is recalling nearly 645,000 vehicles over safety issues, one of the automaker's largest recalls in years. For months, Nissan has been fielding complaints and warranty claims about engine issues with its best-selling model. The fuel-efficient Rogue SUV uses a tiny but turbocharged 3-cylinder engine. There are potentially two separate problems. For roughly half the recalled vehicles, the issue is a loss of drive power and broken throttle gears. The other half may have an issue with engine bearings that can lead to discharging hot oil, adding fire risk to the loss of drive power. Dealers will reprogram software and replace parts if needed. The Rogue's built at Nissan's flagship American factory in Smyrna. This recall affects virtually all Rogues made and sold in the United States in the last few years. One of Nashville's Civil War-era sites is getting a long-overdue facelift. WPLN's Cynthia Abrams reports that the first phase of Fort Negley's expansion will kick off this month.
The renovations will include a memorial lawn in honor of the people who built the fort, new walking paths, and historical installations. The effort arrives after Fort Negley went without significant maintenance upgrades for decades. And it comes at a time when commemorating the history of the Black laborers is, as Nashville Mayor Freddie O'Connell calls it, especially important.
There are people trying to legally prevent histories like those of Fort Negley from being included in textbooks or even our discourse. And that is why the Fort Negley story is one worth knowing, especially right now.
Fort Negley has a complicated history. It was built by Black men, women, and even child laborers who were forced into work by the Union Army. For descendants of these laborers, like Janine Blackman, the expansion is a way to honor and feel connected to her history.
I feel like my ancestors were crying tears of joy. We were celebrating this fact this day had come.
The first phase of construction is expected to take 12 to 14 months. Cynthia Abrams, WPLN News.
You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. Foster kids could be placed in facilities typically reserved for kids who've committed serious crimes under a bill introduced at the state capitol. WPLN's criminal justice reporter Paige Flager says this is the second time lawmakers have considered this move, but this time the proposal is coming from higher up in state government.
Ella Bat-Ami wants people to understand the pressure on foster care kids to be perfect.
We don't get to make mistakes. We don't get to have temper tantrums. We don't get to have bad days. We're not allowed to be children.
Bat-Ami is a former foster youth who wrote the Foster Care Bill of Rights last year. She says that kids like her are living on a knife's edge. To act like a kid is to get into trouble, but getting into trouble could cost them their home, their foster family, and under a new proposal, getting into trouble could land foster care kids in a juvenile justice facility.
Foster children are entitled to a childhood in the same way other children are entitled to a childhood, and it should not be a childhood with the sword of prison dangling over their heads.
This bill is sponsored by top Republicans, but it's an administration bill, meaning it came from the governor's office and the Department of Children's Services. At a hearing at the Capitol, DCS's legislative director, Jim Lehman, explained why the department feels there's a need for legislation like this.
We have an issue where we are receiving children into custody that are dependent and neglected. The court has ruled them dependent and neglected.
Meaning in the foster care side of the system.
But their behaviors don't match what you would think of as a abused or a neglected or an abandoned child.
He said that these particular foster care kids are hard to find placements for because of the way that they act. DCS Commissioner Margie Quinn added that these foster youth can be violent towards other kids and staffers, but are not being punished.
That lack of accountability, I think, gives rise to additional violent behavior within our facilities. I think that's unsafe for youth who are vulnerable, and we need to put a stop to that.
Taking a step back, DCS has been under fire for keeping difficult-to-place youth in office buildings. A recent audit found one child slept in an office for more than 100 days while awaiting placement. And this legislative push comes as the department is expanding bed space by building more high-security facilities.
It's concerning when any youth serving system is looking to incarceration as a solution for problems.
Jasmine Miller is an attorney with the national nonprofit Youth Law Center. She says while it's unclear how the process would work, foster care kids could be classified as, quote, children in need of heightened supervision because of violent behavior or even just the threat of violent behavior. And once a kid has that classification, they could be placed in some of the most secure jail-like facilities in the state, with barbed wire and cells that lock. She says that placement could make youth ineligible for foster care benefits when they age out of the system. And the state could miss out on at least $1 million in federal funding.
There are a lot of federal incentives to keep young people in the community. Those federal incentives are aligned with research and with this practice, and most importantly, with what is best for children.
Former foster youth Bat-Ami says even if the legislation does not make it into law, it should alarm Tennesseans that this is the way the system sees kids like her.
Our governor with DCS have decided the solution to kids being placed in offices is to put them in prison. This is how the children in foster care are being treated, like criminals.
Paige Flager, WPLN News.
The governor's office did not respond to requests for this story, and DCS won't comment on pending legislation. We do this roundup of Nashville news every weekday. Please consider subscribing on your favorite podcasting app. I know I subscribe and am often telling people to subscribe themselves. Learn something from Nina Cardona almost every day. Thanks so much to all you who have left these 5-star reviews and thumbs up or a review in your app of choice. Every little bit of love really does tell those algorithms that more people should listen to Nina Cardona. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported, so thank you. You can make a donation anytime at WPLN.org. That's it for this Friday. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back on Monday, but make this weekend a good one, and we'll catch up next week.